Gamajova, Nemkviandi me Otsotritlisva, da me Gamanidanva. That is only some of the Georgian that I learned during my 9-month stay here in Tbilisi. And some of you might wonder what a German guy is doing for such a long time here in Tbilisi. And I think, like a lot of young people, I was struggling what to do after my bachelor. Do I want to start work? Do I want to continue with the master? And I didn't want to do either of them, so I decided to do a gap year and do an internship in an NGO. Because I always see myself in the future working in an NGO, so I thought it's good to gain some experiences. And when I was searching the internet for internship opportunities, I came across Georgia. And you must know I already wanted to go to Georgia 4 years ago for holidays. And then, I don't know, somehow I decided not to go to Georgia and I ended up in Kazakhstan, which was also a nice holiday. And since then I always had Georgia on my mind. And also in Germany it's like a trending country. A lot of people want to go there for vacation, which on the one side is really good because like that Georgia gets more and more popular. But on the other side also I know it's not so easy for Georgians sometimes because of all the tourists, the prices are rising and everything. And so when I was searching the internet, I saw this internship opportunity at the Institute for the Study of Nationalism and Conflicts here in Tbilisi. And I thought it's really nice. It's Georgia, I get to live here, not only being here as a tourist, so I can dig in deeper into the culture and engage with the people and learn about the history and everything of Georgia. And so it was set and I came here last September. There was still a lot of restrictions with COVID in the beginning. And yeah, so I tried to slowly get to know Georgia, like the culture, especially the food in the beginning. We were eating a lot outside and I fell in love with Georgian food and Georgian wine. And then also during my internship, I started to learn more and more about the conflicts and the history. And I was reading a lot, like the Soviet past of Georgia, and then the 90s with the two conflicts with Abkhazia and South Ossetia, the 2008 war. And I was really shocked how little I knew about this, because in Germany, in the heart of Europe somehow, yeah, in school we don't learn about that, unfortunately. And so I was so glad to be here and to experience that and have the possibility to ask my colleagues, my bosses, my friends questions, how they feel about it, how they think about it, and how they learn it in school. And that was really eye-opening for me and interesting. And I also noticed some differences, and I think that's quite interesting because, as you know, Germany also has like a quite moved history in the 20th century. There were 2 world wars where Germany played a major role. There was the Holocaust that the Germans did, and so learning about German history in school for me, it was very focused on that, of course, and on the question of the guilt and shame, and that Germany is a perpetrator and that Germany did bad things to a lot of countries, nations, ethnicities, religious minorities. And that is my approach, like the narrative that is prevailing in Germany, that we are the perpetrators and that's how we see history somehow, at least until 1945. And then with like the new German state after 45, it of course, the narrative is a little bit different because together with France, we are like the founders of Europe and the European Union. And here in Georgia, I think like the look on history is quite different because Georgia is also surrounded by various different countries that had different power struggles in the last centuries. There were the Mongols coming, the Turks, the Persians, and the Russians, of course. And so what I hear, or what people told me a lot of time, the vibe that I was getting is that Georgia is always the victim of the other countries. And of course, if you have like this big neighbor, Russia, of course it's understandable to see yourself as the victim. But when I was at school in Germany, I was always asking me, why do we only have that one narrative? Is it really true that we are only the perpetrators before 45 and then afterwards we were like the engine of the European Union? And I think there's always more to it, and it's just sad that there's always only one narrative that is prevailing in society. And I think it's the same somehow in Georgia. There's this victim narrative that is prevailing, and there might be other narratives. Maybe sometimes Georgia was the aggressor, or sometimes Georgia was protecting another nation, or I don't know what. There's so many more things than only this one narrative. And I think that's what that's what makes the situation here in society also so difficult, because like all the minorities, like the Azeri minority, the Armenian minority, then in South Ossetia and Abkhazia, and the Georgians, everybody sees themselves as the victim of somebody. And usually if you're a victim of somebody, you want the other person to apologize. But if everybody thinks they're the victim, then who should do the first step to apologize? And I think, so for me, that is one of the aspects that I see in Georgia, why, like, there is no like social cohesion, and that like society gets together and makes something out of this beautiful country. And I think that's really sad on the one side, and on the other side, I also do completely understand it. And then I especially started to understand it even more when the war between Russia and the Ukraine broke out, because a lot of, like, I was of course talking to a lot of Georgians, everybody was upset, but I noticed, me, as I have never lived during a war and I've never experienced trauma caused by war, I have a totally different feeling and approach to the war than Georgians who lived in 2008, in the 90s, or even in other kinds of wars. And that was, it was really interesting, because I noticed that for Georgia, their history, their recent history especially, is so closely connected to traumas, to own experiences, to emotions that they have, and all that came back up when the war started. The portrayal of the war is different in Georgia than it is in Germany, for example. Of course, I haven't been in Germany when the war started and the weeks after that, because I've been here in Georgia, but for what I heard from my friends and from my family, there was a lot of solidarity in both countries. But I think the big difference that I noticed was that here in Georgia, there was also a big solidarity in the population, but it was only the population and not the government. And in Germany, it was the population and the government that were going in the same direction, that wanted the same. And I think that's also quite interesting, because here it was more than about this kind of polarization. It's the people against the government, as it was, for example, also when I arrived in October, where it was Ivanishvili and the Georgian Dream against Saakashvili and the United National Movement in the communal elections. And this kind of polarization was also a new experience for me that I experienced here in Georgia, because for me, Germany, of course, we have some polarized issues, but then it's always about the content. Like, for example, with COVID, it was about having restrictions or not having restrictions, but it was not about this politician against this politician. And here I have the impression it's a lot of time more about the person and not so much about the content. And I think that's really sad, because in a democracy it shouldn't be about the person, because the person is just a representative of the population. It should more be about the content that the person is standing for. And so this experience of polarization and these emotions that came up with the war were really impressive for me, and really showed me a different side of Georgia. Because if you come here as a tourist, the side of Georgia that you get to know is like this really friendly people that help you on the streets, that invite you for chacha, that invite you for wine, that invite you for food. And everybody is nice, friendly, kind. And then if you stay here for longer, and with the war, there was this totally other side that came out from Georgia, like this traumatized population that is really torn by the conflicts. When I started my work at my NGO, of course I learned a lot about the conflicts, but conflicts is just the current state, and everybody wants to have peace in the future. And so I had to ask myself what peace means to me, or what peace actually is. And for me, peace was always given. It was something that I grew up with, because in Germany we haven't had war in a long time. And so for me it was something I never really thought about before. And when I got to exchange opinions with Georgians, I heard that for them peace was never really given, and they think a lot about it because they don't have it. And I think it's oftentimes like that. You think more about the things that you don't have than about the things that you actually have. And so it was really interesting to get their point of view of peace. And I think for Germany, or for Germans, or at least for speaking for myself, peace is always related to this kind of welfare, like prosperity, that you have a house, you have a garden, you have good friends, and that kind of stuff. And in Georgia I learned that peace is actually about just living, somehow surviving. And yeah, that is really different, and I think it's really sad that we have in Germany, it's always focused on material things a lot of times, like a house, a new car, and this kind of stuff, and not so much about the people, that they live in good conditions and that we are happy that like people can go to school and have basic education and can live where they want to live and are not displaced somewhere in the country. And so my vision of peace changed a little bit towards having, like, being glad that in Germany we have this basic thing, and that I see that in Georgia a lot of things are going towards this direction. But of course, peace in Georgia I think is also related to the two conflicts and to somehow a resolution of the two conflicts. And I think in this regard it is so important and so powerful what the NGOs are doing here, and like initiatives, young people that are engaging in dialogue, in exchange, in portraying different narratives, in workshops and trainings in conflict sensitivity, in peace education, this kind of stuff. And I think it's really, really interesting and really important, especially as on a political level you don't have any constructive communication. And so it's even more important that the civil society is engaging and trying to keep the bonds that might still hold people from the one side and the other side. And especially with young people, I have the impression it can get really dangerous in the future, because in Georgia people speak Georgian and they learn more and more English in school, and in Abkhazia and South Ossetia they learn Russian. And so they, like, the common language that they are sharing and that they can communicate in is drifting away. And I think if in the future people from Abkhazia in Georgia or from South Ossetia in Georgia can't even speak in the same language with each other, it will be so difficult to find a common sense and to engage with each other. And so I hope that all the NGOs here continue their good work and don't get tired by all the setbacks that might come from either side of the conflict, and might stay as motivated as they are right now, even though it already lasts for 30 years and nobody knows how long it will keep on lasting. Because also in Germany we were divided for 45 years and nobody knew when it will end. And with this uncertainty, I think it's always really difficult to keep up the work and to be motivated and to say to yourself, okay, let's do that again and let's have this exchange, because you never know when it will have fruits and when it will reach some really good outcome that you're all happy with. And maybe one last thing that I would like to share with you is, because I'm going back to Germany soon, and one thing that I will definitely miss in Germany is going to restaurants in the Georgian way. Because in Germany you always, if you're fancy, you order a starter, a main course and a dessert or something, but you always have your own plate, you eat from your own plate. And in Georgia you order, like, for the whole table you order a lot of food, you order khachapuri, khinkali for everyone. Everybody's just sharing, and I really like that kind of sitting together, drinking wine, sharing the food. And I really will miss that in Germany. And I hope that one day here in Georgia, Abkhaz, South Ossetians, Georgians, Armenians, Azeris, everybody can sit at the same table, everybody's ordering something, and all are just sharing and have like a peaceful supra together. That is like something that I would hope one day will happen here in the South Caucasus, and yes, that's my vision for what will happen in the future. Didi Matlova.